Hi class, in lesson 3 you will be solving proportions using means and extremes. Learning goals for today: rewrite proportions to maintain equality, represent proportional relationships by equations, develop strategies to solve problems, and use proportional relationships to solve multi-step problems. Key terms to look for in lesson 3: proportion, variable, means, extremes, solve a proportion, isolate the variable, and inverse operations. Please turn to page 71, activity 3.1, maintaining equality with proportions. Because it is impossible to count each individual animal, marine biologists use a method called the Recapture method to estimate the population of certain sea creatures. In certain areas of the world, biologists randomly catch and tag a given number of sharks. After a period of time, such as a month, they recapture a second sample of sharks and count the total number of sharks as well as the number of recaptured tagged sharks. Then the biologists use proportions to estimate the population of sharks living in a certain area. Biologists can set up a proportion to estimate the total number of sharks in an area. The original number of tagged sharks to the total number of sharks in an area is equal to the number of recaptured tagged sharks to the number of sharks caught in the second sample. Although capturing the sharks once is necessary for tagging, it is not necessary to recapture the sharks each time. At times, the tags can be observed through binoculars from a boat or at shore. Biologists originally caught and tagged 24 sharks off the coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and then released them back into the bay. The next month, they caught 80 sharks, with 8 of the sharks already tagged. To estimate the shark population off the Cape Cod coast, biologists set up the following proportion: 24 tagged sharks to P total sharks is equal to 8 recaptured tagged sharks to 80 total sharks. Notice the variable P in the proportion. In this proportion, let P represent the total shark population off the coast of Cape Cod. Remember that a variable is a letter or symbol used to represent a number. Please turn to page 72 and answer number 1 and 2 with your group. For number 1, here are 3 different proportions that you could use to determine the total shark population off of the coast of Cape Cod. Please check over the 3 proportion examples with your group. And for number 2, using either of the proportions from number 1, there would be approximately 240 sharks off of the coast of Cape Cod. Please answer number 4 with your group. For number 4, here is the proportion that you should have set up in order to show your work and determine your answer. My answer is D is equal to 1,440. That's going to be how many deer were observed in the refuge. Please turn to page 73 and answer number 6 with your group. For number 6, if my original proportion is A over B is equal to C over D, there are 3 different ways that I could rewrite that proportion to maintain equality. One way is D over B is equal to C over A. Another way is D over C is equal to B over A. And a third way, A over C is equal to B over D. Let's look at the bottom of page 73, activity 3.2, solving proportions with means and extremes. The Ready Steady Battery Company tests batteries as they come through the assembly line and then uses a proportion to predict how many of its total production might be defective. On Friday, the quality controller tested every 10th battery and found that of the 320 batteries tested, 8 were defective. If the company shipped a total of 3,200 batteries, how many might be defective? Please turn to page 74. Let's analyze a few methods. Please answer number 1 with your group. For number 1, both Parker and John David scaled up the ratios to determine the number of defective batteries. Please turn to page 75 and answer number 2 with your group. For number 2, first, Nora scaled down the original ratio, then she scaled up that ratio to determine the total defective batteries out of 3,200 total batteries. Please answer number 3 with your group. For number 3, Natalie multiplied the two middle numbers and the two outside numbers and noticed that they had the same product. So she knew that she could solve any proportion by setting these two products equal to each other. Please turn to page 76 and answer number 4, letters A, B, and C with your group. For number 4, letter A, I am going to use John David and Parker's method of scaling down in order to determine the number of granola bars. G is going to equal 1 granola bar. For letter B, I'm going to use Natalie's method of multiplying the outside numbers and the inside numbers, or the outside numbers and middle numbers, in order to get 45 questions. And for letter C, I'm going to use Nora's method, and I am going to first scale down in order to get a unit rate, and then scale up in order to get $6 for every 5 miles. The relationship that Natalie noticed is between the means and extremes. In a proportion that is written A to B is equal to C to D, the product of the two values in the middle, the means, equals the product of the two values on the outside, the extremes. To solve a proportion using this method, first identify the means and extremes. Then set the product of the means equal to the product of the extremes and solve for the unknown quantity. To solve a proportion means to determine all the values of the variables that make the proportion true. This will conclude lesson 3 on solving proportions using means and extremes. Please let your teacher know if you have any questions. Thanks.